Hey, welcome back, guys, to our final Thursday together in the year 2020. And today we're going to be looking at modern economic liberalism. So at the end of this lesson, you should be able to understand the presence of modern economic liberalism in Canada. You should be able to explore the idea of what elements of the economy warrant regulation. And you should understand the factors of collectivism and individualism within Canada, and thematically explore the idea of freedom versus control. So lots going on here. How would you be assessed on it? A lot of these themes come up on A2s. So that's like a common theme on an essay. Or it's the umbrella question on an A1. An umbrella question on almost every set of A1 is this conflict between freedom and control, this conflict between individualism and collectivism, the need for the evolution of liberalism. So you definitely see nuances of it come up on the writing, and some of the content, some of the language will come up on the multiple choice. So, what elements of the economy warrant intervention here in Canada? You have a cartoon that is trying to present a ideological perspective. So the cartoonist has used this side of the cartoon to say your taxes pay for public goods and services, sanitation, parks and rec, police and fire protection, highways, roads, education, welfare, public health. So by making that list, we can understand that the ideological perspective of this cartoonist is that they see a role for the government to play in the economy. This is promoting modern economic liberalism, freedom through government. The government must accept a role. What role? These roles. How do they pay for the role? By taking our tax money. So the audience might be people in Canada that are wondering, why is it that we're paying so much taxes? And the message here, the ideological perspective, is that through the taxes we can achieve freedom. That in a Maslow hierarchy of needs, we can see some things in there that are essential to a good life, to a healthy life. Things like public health and welfare and education. So this is an ideological perspective. It's not promoting communism. There's no violence in there. But it's promoting elements of socialism within Canada. Elements of a mixed economy where you're mixing in collectivism with individualism. And based upon just some of the nuances within the source itself, the activity that is happening, we can maybe deduce that the time period would be, the decades following Mackenzie King introducing more of a mixed approach to economics here in Canada, and maybe some of the public backlash saying, well, why are we doing this, right? So it'd be logical that this cartoon could be from the 1930s to the late 1950s time period, where Canadians are pondering to what extent they want to actually have mixed economics here in Canada. So there's always going to be lots of links to William's videos in our lessons. You can tell that in class we haven't been watching them, but if you get very lost, it's a good way to pop in and say, okay, what's the basics here? What are the basics? I do have an extended Prezi though. One of our main goals here today is to talk about the role that the government plays in the economy, and we are going to take a peek at that now. So, to watch a Prezi from home, you may have to just change your settings like that. So what is the prescribed role of the government in the economy? This Prezi is meant to help you with essay writing. And guess what? You guys have an essay that's due in just over a week. This Prezi is meant to help you with that. Who can remind me the topic of the essay? Anyone? So the topic of the essay is the conflict between individualism and collectivism to see which one's a better foundation of a society, right? So what this Prezi is looking at is, here in Canada, what role does the government play in the economy? And although you're all Canadians, you might be looking at that list and saying, I never thought of that. I never thought that, the Canadian government plays a role in the economy because it owns certain corporations. We call them crown corporations. So an argument could be made that there are essential things that should be owned, operated, controlled, regulated by the state. Canada is a cold place. In Canada, we need heat. In Canada, we need electricity to survive our harsh winters. Do we really want things like heat and electricity to be unregulated to the point that we have Canadians going without heat? And in terms of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, freezing to death because their needs are not being met? That seems pretty cruel. So in the common good, in the collective interest, we say, you know what, we're okay with the state regulating some of the prices here, setting some price control on essentials. In some provinces, they go a step further, and not only is the state regulating private enterprise, the state is the enterprise. They're the crown corporation, like BC Hydro or Ontario Hydro or Hydro-Quebec. You're seeing a pattern there that is in charge of delivering power to the people. We also have wage and price controls just in general. Things like minimum wage legislation. What is minimum wage legislation? It's the government intervening in the economy, because without it, there would be exploitation of labor. So the government is saying that, you know, without this law, the capitalists, the bourgeoisie, might be taking advantage of the labor like Karl Marx predicted. So we're going to create a law saying that in Alberta, you cannot pay people less than this amount per hour. So we have wage control. We also have price control for things like essential items that I mentioned. Another role that the government in Canada plays in the economy, well, you're experiencing it right now. We have public education, we have public health care. So we have these essential things that people have said that a path to a good life goes through education. We want to make sure that education is a leveling experience, that it's not like it once was, where you were born into a lottery of birth because only some people could afford an education. So we have, to some extent, meritocracy in Canada, where everyone has access to the same level of public education, and then from that, you can, through your own merit, end up finding entrance into college and university programs. And to some extent, they're subsidized as well. We also have other laws that are passed, like antitrust laws and landlord-tenant acts that protect consumers and also perhaps protect in terms of the Landlord-Tenant Act, it protects both, the landlords and the tenant. We have legislation that protects consumers and producers, like product safety. So here in Canada, when you get a hockey helmet, there's going to be a little CSA approval sticker on it. That's the government regulating the economy, saying that, you know, we are aware of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. We know that people in the past have misled consumers about the quality of goods. So we are going to be a part of that quality inspection. Employment insurance. These are the ones that people think of. Ones that maybe you don't think of. The Canadian government represents Canada as a part of our international trade representation. So there's another Team Canada, not the World Juniors that are currently being quarantined, but there's another Team Canada, and that includes Prime Minister Trudeau. So Prime Minister Trudeau goes to places like India and tries to sell Canada. Like, hey, you should buy Bombardier trains. And he dresses up in Indian attire and embarrasses us instead of selling us, and the Indian people buy less of our products. But one of his jobs is to sell Canada. International trade representation. Another thing that the Canadian governments will do is sometimes they will fund entrepreneurship, research, and innovation. That many of the people in here should be looking at scholarships and bursaries for this year, and that will help unlock future potential in fields like the sciences. Well, some of that scholarships and bursaries are directed through the government. So they're trying to fund entrepreneurship, research, and innovation, trying to coordinate universities around Canada. Right now we're seeing that with the vaccine problem, that Canada dropped the ball on a little bit. We also see the protection of economic liberties. So we have laws that are passed to protect your private and personal property. The Canadian federal government sells Canada savings bonds. They have a pension plan, the CPP, for seniors. So the Canadian government plays a massive role in the economy. And I would say that one of the key ones is down here, stabilize us through fiscal and monetary policy. So they tax us, there's personal, land, sales, exercise, corporate taxes They collected taxes, but then they tried to shape the country through fiscal and monetary policy. They tried to stabilize the economy and potentially grow at a sustainable rate. If you look further into this Prezi, you will see that, it goes into some detail about each one of those things, but those are just more talking points. By the end, it looks at, well, what is the budget provincially? What do they spend their money on? What is the budget municipally? What do they spend their money on? Now, you're not going to be tested on the B&A Act and the separation of the responsibilities of power among the three levels of government in Canada. But it is interesting to know, what is it that some of these levels of government spend the money on? And a lot of it is redistribution of wealth, coming to the aid of people that have been marginalized, coming to the aid of senior citizens, coming to the aid of children in poverty. So this is just one example of a list of projects. And living in the age of this pandemic, we know that our government also played a major role in the economy by responding to the pandemic with programs like CERB. So we do have a list of, what does each level of the government do? And you can see that sometimes, like for Canada's Aboriginal and Indigenous peoples, each level of the government has a commitment to them. But then there's some levels of government, like emergency medical services, that's just a municipal thing. So what's one role that the Wetaskiwin City plays in the economy? They provide emergency medical services. They provide fire protection. So when I mark essays, and people are writing essays about what role should the government play in the economy, nobody gets into this. Nobody gets into this. They write the Goldilocks essay we've been talking about. 1920s too little, Soviet Union too much, Canada today just right, but then they don't really get into this. So theoretically, most people should get a 60, and the only thing that elevates them is that they're good writers, and it sounds more sophisticated. Give me some detail. Get into it. Get into some detail. Be specific. So if you're going to say that we need the government to involve themselves into the economy, explain how and why. We need fire protection because it's essential to... I think it's an essay that begins to write itself a little bit. So that's one way to help you with the essay, is that Prezi. We also have another Prezi, because, why not have two? Two is always better than one. This next Prezi is going to be looking at what elements of the economy warrant government intervention. And it's comprehensive. I'm not going to brag too much, because you obviously already know that I'm an amazing person. But this is one of the best Prezis I've made. So what is the essence of every economics essay? It's this. Every economics essay, and 45% of the essays you're going to write will be economic. So what is it basically saying is, where should we have government? Well, here we go. This is where we should have government. What about looking at the impact of the product on the environment? So to what extent should the government regulate the economy? Well, they should regulate products based upon the impact the product might have on the environment. So critically thinking here, you might be looking at this title and you might say, I bet he talks about oil. I bet he talks about natural gas. I bet we could talk about the logging industry and clear cuts. You're right, you can talk about all of those things. So there are industries and products that specifically impact the environment. When you have companies like Monsanto that create pesticides and herbicides that literally destroy life, that's the purpose of them, I think I want somebody watching them. Monsanto only cares about money, right? Only cares about profit. I need somebody that is more accountable, not just accountable by profit, but accountable to the will of the people. I need a democratically elected government watching over corporations. A democratically elected government that listens to the will of the people, not the will of corporations. I don't want a corpocracy, I want a democracy. Otherwise, this is what we get. So, do you have industries like whaling? Since the 1980s, we've seen a resurgence of whales globally, because in the 1980s, Star Trek just happened to make a movie about the end of whales, and people watched the movie and they thought, holy crap, we need to save the whales. Now, Hollywood aside, we have lobby groups that do a great job of getting the public's attention. Here we're trying to shame Japan into addressing their traditional whaling practices that are no longer sustainable, because globally we don't have many whales left. So what's one role that the government can play in the economy? Listen to the will of the people, like environmental lobbyists, and create legislation that at least regulates, if not bans, practices that are not sustainable, like whaling. So there's a video called Food Incorporated, and every time I go to the grocery store I think of it, because in it they talk about this pastoral fantasy. I love that language, pastoral fantasy. That in 2020 we live in a pastoral fantasy. When I have hamburger, and I actually had hamburger for breakfast because I had some left over that I needed to eat up, I've got this fantasy that my burger lived a good life. You know, that this cow lived a good life, it was a free cow, and you know, it was a healthy cow. And if you watch Food Incorporated, you know that most of the meat that we eat is not living that kind of life. It's not as healthy as we thought it was. So we live in a pastoral fantasy. I don't actually get to see the cow. I don't get to meet the cow. I don't get to go and watch his life before I eat it. For the most part. Some people do, because you guys have your own cows and farms and stuff like that. But you know, the rest of us, we don't really know the things we eat. We need to trust corporations. We can't trust corporations. So we need to trust government to regulate corporations. Because our pastoral fantasy is fantasy. You know, the chickens we eat, the cows we eat, they're probably raised in conditions that breed disease. Another thing that could be regulated is our ecological footprint, but it's not Alberta that's destroying the world, it's China. So a role that the government could play in the economy is to address our local environmental concerns for sure, but also address the bigger picture. So anytime that you kill things on a white canvas, it's pretty controversial. Here you have the clubbing of baby seals on snow. Many people globally look at the Canadian practice of clubbing baby seals on snow and saying, hey, we shouldn't do that. It looks pretty grim. But have you ever seen a cow at a slaughterhouse get its head cut off? It's pretty grim too. This just looks grim because it's on snow and you get to see the consequences. So if you're not a vegetarian or a vegan and you're looking at this saying, oh, we gotta ban this, or you're gonna have a burger for lunch, you're a hypocrite. But people do look at this and say, wow, we need to do better for the seals. These are people that just think oil's not a good thing. They drove to Washington in a car, apparently fueled by pixie dust, and these plastics that are in their signs apparently are not made by oil. So a lot of hypocrisy there for sure. Not saying I don't agree with them, but come on. What elements of the market warrant government intervention? Potential revenue. I want my government to intervene in the economy so they can make money, so they can tax me less. Because I don't know if I made this clear, but I hate being taxed. I pay tens of thousands of dollars in tax every year. Too much tax. You know, at the end of the year, my family is probably paying, I don't know, 60, 70, 80,000. Well, at least $80,000 tax. That's too much. That's gross. That's disgusting. And that's not even GST. You include GST and stuff like that, we're probably close to $100,000 tax. Now I'm getting sick thinking of it. So maybe instead of taxing me, the government should get into the business of business and make revenue. So rather than having 45 different marijuana shops in Edmonton, hey, let's go to Uncle Buck's. Let's go to Marijuana Land, or like some of them have the funniest names, right? Man, that was a missed opportunity for the government to have the equivalent of what used to be the ALCB, the Alberta Liquor Control Board, but they could have had the ALWB, the Alberta Liquor and Weed Board kind of thing. And if the Alberta government was the only one distributing it, man, we could have made a lot of profit out of that. Maybe we wouldn't be talking about cutting teachers' salaries by 20%. Hydro-Quebec makes tons of money for the province of Quebec. Yes, they do tax liquor, but like I said, there used to be in this province just the ALCB. So the current store in town where Slicks is, or in Millet where the library is, those used to be the ALCBs. That was the only liquor store in town. Now in Wetaskiwin we have like 74 liquor stores, right? Like you go anywhere, you can buy alcohol. Actually, I have alcohol for sale up here. You know, alcohol is so freely for sale. I've got one little store in my cabinet here. So what I'm saying is that, you know, maybe instead of decentralizing the distribution of alcohol, you centralize it, and therefore the revenue created isn't padding a corporation or a family, it's helping everyone. So what's an element of society that the government could control? Why not have them sell stuff that people will buy, like marijuana and alcohol, that can raise revenue? That's a great idea. Telephone service used to be Alberta Government Telephones, AGT. We used to have, you know, a very centralized delivery of telephones. How much are you guys spending on your telephone service? A lot. Who's the richest people in Canada? The people who own your telephone companies. Why are they billionaires? Why not, you know, have that money, you know, equalized around all of us by having our governments be the one that's collecting the revenue from the delivery of telephones? It's not like TELUS is doing a good job or Bell is doing a good job with telephones. The government could do just as good of a job, you'd hope. Oil. It's disgusting how much value of Alberta's oil has gone to countries like Denmark and Norway and the United States and China. That foreign countries and foreign companies have made more money off of Alberta's oil within my lifetime than Alberta has. That's ridiculous. That by not nationalizing, it'd really be owned by the province, but by not having this controlled by the province, we have squandered our wealth. There's a reason why Norwegians are all millionaires through their government, because they controlled their oil, and they also got rich off of ours. There's a reason why we're not millionaires and we're in debt, because we invited corporations to come in and plunder us. It's like we've been imperialized, but we've been imperialized at our own invite. Please come in. Please help us get rid of our oil. Now, you're going to pay us a royalty, but it's ridiculously cheap. And that's why we're going to have an incentive for you to come in. Had Alberta owned its oil, and we did own the oil, but owned all the corporations pulling the oil from the ground, man, we would be like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait. These countries where the average person's wealth is, per capita income is like $150,000. We'd be 4 times as wealthy as we are today. Sorry guys, but you know, the generation before you and the generation before that made some bad choices. What elements of the market warrant government intervention? Products where consumers fail to make good decisions. So heroin. BC right now, Vancouver's thinking of decriminalizing heroin because people are using it anyway, so we want to make safe zones. Well, have you ever used heroin? Have you ever used it? Because heroin, you don't use heroin. Heroin uses you. It's not the same as some other drugs. So there are some drugs that cannot be legalized. Because there are drugs that some people do get addicted after the first experiment. You don't experiment. You get hooked. And heroin's one of them. So unless this is your definition of a good life, then maybe we need to be protected. And there are moments where we can't protect ourselves, so the government has to act in local parentis. They have to, because we're irrational, we're like, man, sure, I just watched Train Spotting, that doesn't look so bad. I'll do heroin, I'll dive into a toilet, you know, face first, and the baby will die in the next room. No, I think the warning is that, you know, people make bad choices under the influence of heroin. Bad choices. We drive vehicles that are not great on gas. And we complain about gas prices rather than addressing our choices that we've made. Bad choices. Watch Super Size Me. Not like the dude was bulking to try to get healthier. The dude was eating McDonald's every day to see what impact it would have on his life. And he goes from being a healthy guy to having heart problems within a month. So, yeah, there's things in our society like heroin that need to be regulated because it's unhealthy. McDonald's needs to be regulated. Sugar needs to be regulated. Trans fats need to be regulated. Products that are not suitable for all consumers. So I'm a part of a gangster rap group, and my name is Mick MC Bride. So, you know, when I'm on the mic, I don't think everybody should be listening to what I'm dropping. You know, the lyrics, that the poison that spews from my mouth is not suitable for all audiences. That there will be things done and said at my concert. So I have a friend called George Birdie that used to be the front man of a group called RAHOWA, Racial Holy War, and his concerts are not for adults, or only for adults. So you had to be 18 to attend them. In the United States, there was a band called Two Live Crew, and they specifically had concerts just for adults, and they were still banned in the USA. So the United States government said, your lyrics are too explicit. What's happening on the stage is too explicit. But they're like, this is for an adults only show. You know, you're meddling with the free choice of adults, of rational people. But we can all agree that there's some things that maybe 6-year-olds shouldn't watch. You know, me killing a pig on the stage while I'm screaming. You know, other people pay $50 for that because that's entertainment. But maybe a 6-year-old would get scarred. So there's certain weapons that maybe 6-year-olds shouldn't have. There's explicit lyrics. I just want to bust out some rhymes right now. What other elements of the thing? Maybe some safety stuff. We don't want the airline industry to regulate the airline industry, because when the airline industry regulates the airline industry, guess what happens? Airplanes fall from the sky because they don't have the same level of maintenance, because maintenance is costly. When an airplane's on the ground, it's not making money. So when the airline industry in the United States was allowed to regulate the airline industry, airlines started to crash. Why? Because mankind's greedy. It's reoccurring. We're irrational. So, being that we act irresponsibly, the government must take responsibility for the safety of the consumers. So, products that cause social and economic harm. So, because sweatshops cause social and economic harm, sweatshops need to be regulated. I've never seen somebody make that statement in an essay. And that's an E statement. But no, people want to say stuff like, Sweden's good, man, and then they just leave it like that. It's like we're doing advanced math and people put down on page 2 plus 2 is 6. I feel like I'm angry. Essential goods during times of crisis. So right now in Winnipeg, they're saying we can only buy essential goods. In World War II, certain products were regulated. So you go to the grocery store and it said sugar, you're only allowed half a pound a week. Even if you have more money, each person can only have this much. Each person can only use half the usual purchase of tea or 3/4 of what you usually get for coffee, because of the war, there's a shortage. During war, there's rationing. During war, you have a war economy. You have to answer the 3 basic economic questions with the goal of surviving and winning the war. Right now, we're at war with the pandemic, and therefore the government has a responsibility to regulate the industry. Right? They need to jump in and make sure that toilet paper is not $55 a roll. There's some clown in Australia that bought up $10,000 worth of hand sanitizer last March and wanted to sell it on their equivalent of Kijiji for like tenfold of that. And guess what? No one was buying it. So then he tried to return it back to the grocery store, and they're like, we're gonna charge you to reshelf it. So profiteering in war is a crime. Profiteering during a pandemic should be a crime. You know, you're taking advantage of human suffering. That'd be like, it'd be a really cold day, and then your heating company phones you and says, guess what, the heat price just went up. Do you want to survive the night? If so, give us $10,000 to keep the heat on. That's not fair. Following 9/11, there were some people in New York City charging $20 on 9/11 while the World Trade Centers were burning and collapsing and people were fleeing. And people are thirsty, right? Because they're obviously there's a lot of hormones and emotions, but they're also thirsty because of all the contagions in the air. And then some of the local stores are like, oh, you want to buy a bottle of water? It just went up to $20. What? How can you do that? How can you do that at a time like that? That's when you just take the bottle of water. right? You're like, no, I'm not gonna pay you 20, but thanks for the walk. No, try to stop me. Idiot. Angry. This guy's angry. So why is gasoline about the same price as Coca-Cola? That doesn't make sense. How come food has gone up so much within your lifetime that it's caused revolutions in parts of the world? And as the climate continues to change, we will see more revolutions as the price of food keeps skyrocketing. So maybe the rent is too damn high. And this guy who looks like Hulk Hogan a little bit, he's right. That if you have to pay $900 a week to rent a place for one room, or $4,600 a month for a one-bedroom apartment, rent is too damn high. So his argument is maybe someone, the government, should regulate how much landlords can charge for rent. Scams need to be regulated. You don't want your child sending money to some fake prince that is promising them a return on their investment. I had a classmate. He was my friend. He was so proud after Christmas holidays in grade 8. He came to school and he had these Likes on. And he's like, hey, look at my new shoes. No, he was kind of poor. And his mom bought him some Likes because his mom couldn't afford Nikes. And one of the bullies in class, we'll just call him Russ McBride, pointed out how those were fake shoes and they smelled like garbage and they were garbage, and that meant that he was garbage. Joy didn't come back to school for a while because Joy was bullied. I should have known better. But there are people that fall for scams. Likes, convertos, things like that. You go to any major city and there's floods of people trying to sell you purses and stuff on the streets, and the purses look authentic, but they smell like cat urine because they're not authentic. And people fall for scams all the time, and scams typically target the most vulnerable people, the marginalized people within our society. So people go knock on the door of senior citizens and say, wow, did you know your roof? I can see that your roof is compromised, right? You're gonna start getting moisture inside, your house is gonna fall. And seniors can't get on the roof to check for themselves, so they're like, oh, okay, yeah, can you fix it? Sure, usually we charge $15,000, but I'll fix it for 10. They don't actually fix it for 10, right? They don't do much. They steal money from senior citizens. It's a scam. It should be regulated. It is regulated. Key industries for national security. So Petro-Canada, maybe in the United States, NASA is an industry that we don't want privatized. I have more faith in SpaceX getting to Mars than NASA, but that's sad because the value of Mars and other places beyond will be in the hands of corporations instead of government. That maybe it shouldn't be Elon Musk getting to Mars first, or it shouldn't be Google getting to Venus first. Maybe it should be these should be monumental achievements made by the government so that the wealth collected can be shared by all, not just to make certain people even more wealthy. The gap will only grow. But what if the government's vision is misdirected? So that's the problem, right? If we're saying the government should regulate all these things, what if the government, like FDR in this cartoon, is doing the wrong thing? And I look at Trudeau, and I look at Trudeau's fiscal policy this last year, and he still hasn't shown a budget, and he just keeps spending hundreds of billions of dollars, which should be illegal to do without airing a budget through the House of Commons and being held accountable. But what Trudeau's been doing is doing the same thing as FDR is being shown to do here during the New Deal. Just basically taking money from taxpayers and pouring it away without any real vision, hoping that it will work, but there's tremendous leak. And if you listen to any of the interviews, when people are asking Trudeau about vaccines, and he's like, oh man, we have an impressive portfolio of vaccines that we've purchased. But Canada is one of the only countries that doesn't have control over actually creating our own vaccine, because we've got contracts with corporations, but we didn't negotiate within that contract the ability to make the vaccine here, so now we're at their mercy. So Pfizer's going to help the people of New York and of the United States before they help us. So even though we've handed over billions of dollars of Canadian taxpayer dollars for vaccines, we're not going to get vaccinated first. So if you're worried about the vaccine, good news, we'll be able to watch the United States and see how it works there first. So, that's an extended lesson on roles that Canada can play in the economy. So, specific case studies you can talk about: COVID-19 last spring. Why toilet paper suddenly became a panic buying thing. You know, when there's panic in the marketplace, like COVID-19, there's a responsibility for the leadership of the country to calm. You know, FDR said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. FDR did lead during the Great Depression. Trudeau hid during COVID-19. You know, there needs to be a balance between environmentalism and economic growth. So you can look at the pipeline protests, not the pipestone protests. Should there be a limit to dissent and disobedience? So should protesters be allowed to destroy infrastructure key to an industry like the pipeline industry? Should the government be intervening? You know, what we've had is the government watching from the sidelines as protesters and people within the industry are in a pseudo-war with each other. At some point, the government has a responsibility to stabilize this industry. And they started doing that a little bit by investing in it, but then it kind of plateaued. Healthcare is a key one that a lot of people talk about. So Canada's ranked 10th, United States is 11th. But the United States, the government in the United States is paying per capita twice as much as we are. Why? Because the people delivering the healthcare in the United States are doing it for profit. Canadians do it for profit too. Doctors are not doing it for free. And often the person owning the doctor's office is a capitalist, not a doctor. But what we are seeing here is that because you have more privatization in healthcare in the US, the cost is double. So you have the UK, which has the best healthcare system among these countries. The government is spending a fraction of what the United States government is spending. And they're getting a better product. How are they getting a better product? Because these guys want more profit to save lives. There's an ethical thing there. So 16% of the GDP in America goes towards healthcare. So it's not like they're not paying for it. The problem in the United States is that the doctor and the nurse can't really attend to the patient because all these other things are getting in the way. The case manager wants to be a millionaire, the utilization reviewer, the billing supervisor, the insurance company, the discharge planner, all of these people want to get rich because this guy's sick. And that is the true sickness. So is the solution socialized healthcare, socialized medicine? This cartoonist is saying no. Because all socialized medicine can do for you is say, here's 2 aspirin, call me in the morning, because there's not enough funding to actually to provide something that can help. So you can definitely spend some time in this document in the future, look down these rabbit holes, get some case studies that can help you with your essay. You know, what should be individualized, what should be collectivized. If you're going to talk about Sweden and pretend that it's the magical place, I would urge you to look at these links, because I think we have a misunderstanding of how socialist Sweden is. To some extent, Sweden is more capitalist than we are. In Sweden, in education, you have vouchers, so that everybody has education provided by the government, yes, so you don't pay for it, but you use your vouchers and you can shop where you want. So WCHS has a monopoly in Wetaskiwin. You have to come here. So we can do a crap job of teaching it. And where are you going to go? But in Sweden, in places like Stockholm, the schools have to compete with each other for their customers, and therefore they have to provide a better service. So they're using socialism and capitalism combined to provide better education. This is something you've probably seen before, that people don't really get caught fleeing capitalism to seek a better life in a socialist state. So if that's not the case, then maybe socialism is not the great thing you think it is. So we're going to stop lesson 8 there. There's some rabbit holes that you can continue to go down at home. But right now I'm going to upload this to YouTube and give you some stuff to read in the textbook. And then after our mask break in about 20 minutes, we will look at the second lesson of the day.